like to welcome everyone to the April 2026 edition of the CR2C2 seminar series. Today, I think we have a very interesting presentation. And, as we've gone through this, we go back and forth between internal presentations showing, sharing our own research within the consortium, and then we alternate between external ones. And I think we've had a range of other academics from other institutions, public sector researchers. We've had transit authorities and stuff, and I think today will be very interesting in terms of a completely different perspective. So Jeff Hunter from the National Parks Conservation Association is going to give us, I think, some insight from his perspective and from where he comes from in terms of wildlife vehicle collisions. And I think there's also sort of an interesting backstory as to why he's even here presenting to us. I'll let him tell a little bit about that. But what I will say is it speaks to the value of communicating research, technology transfer, the outreach work that Christina and the team are doing to get the word out on the work that's being done throughout CR2C2 and of course at all of our individual campuses. So thank you, Jeff, for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody, or if you're in the Central Time Zone, good morning. I am Jeff Hunter. I'm the Southern Appalachian Director for National Parks Conservation Association, sometimes referred to as NPCA. NPCA is a national, nonprofit, nonpartisan, member-based organization that seeks to protect America's national parks for present and future generations. A lot of our work is inside the boundaries of national parks, but the work I'll be talking about today is beyond boundaries, in part because our national parks are quickly becoming islands surrounded by high-speed roads. The wildlife don't know where those boundaries are. They need to move in and out to fulfill their life cycle, looking for mates and food, new habitat. And so we need to work beyond boundaries if we're going to affect any change on the ground, which is the ultimate goal. The work that I'm going to be talking to you about today is collaborative in nature. So we have nonprofit organizations, we have state organizations, we have federal organizations, and we have the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, tribal interests who are involved in this project. And it does take, all these parties to come together because we're working in North Carolina and Tennessee. So we have a state wildlife agency in each of those places. We have legislatures in each of those states where solutions could potentially come from. Yes, it's super exciting. This is the coolest work I've ever done. For those of you who work in the IT realm, I did have a 20-year career with Verizon where I ran Unisys mainframe computers and mid-range systems collecting metadata for the phone company. I don't know if this is what you were thinking of when you introduced me, but I was a fan of the Grateful Dead and got involved in conservation after going to a benefit concert. And so in addition to working for, that got me out of the corporate world. And these days, in addition to doing my work, I actually teach classes on the Grateful Dead at universities. I just finished one at University of Pittsburgh, but I digress. Today, we're going to talk about the collaboration and what we're trying to do. This is an aerial photo of Interstate 40. Obviously, it looks nothing like that when you're on the roadway. In fact, you can't really grasp the scope of the public lands that you're driving through when you're on I-40 in the Pigeon River Gorge. And by public lands, I'm talking about the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, and depending on where you are on the interstate, you could be 4 to 7 miles from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So our goal is to improve wildlife's ability to cross I-40 in the Pigeon River Gorge, which will result in improved public safety. And as I said earlier, wildlife, they don't recognize those park boundaries. This accident that you're looking at, a vehicle versus elk, occurred on US 19 near Murphy, North Carolina in September 2018. The GPS collar that was on that elk was part of our study. What happens is these young animals, whether it's bear or elk, often are travelers, right? They're young, they're looking for habitat, they want to find a mate, and they go far and wide. And this animal was really far from the Smokies where it was born. Thankfully, this driver was not killed, but you can see the sort of damage that can occur when a vehicle hits a large mammal like this. That vehicle is very much totaled. The solutions that I'll be talking about today are primarily infrastructure based. What you're looking at here is a wildlife overpass in Banff National Park. There are a whole series of overpasses and underpasses where the Trans-Canada Highway runs through the national park. That's not the case here in North Carolina and Tennessee. As I said, it runs through national forest, not the park. But in Canada, they actually have their own highway agency in Parks Canada. And they built these structures because this part of the Trans-Canada Highway was pretty much a bloodbath. Elk would travel seasonally, and large numbers of elk would cross the road, and there were many, many collisions and injuries and fatalities. And so that was one of the reasons why they wanted to build some structures to get wildlife from one side or the other. The other issue is that female grizzly bears were not crossing the roadway. And so we were starting to see some genetic bottlenecks as a result of the habitat fragmentation from the road. This is what this structure would look like from the highway. As you can see, there's fencing, it's vegetated, and they can reduce more than 80% of wildlife vehicle collisions if put in the right location and associated with fencing. And when I say put in the right location, I'm going to be talking about the research that we conducted that informs our interactions with the DOT in North Carolina. These are not only in Banff. In fact, these structures are being built all around the country. I've been to two of these in particular. The upper left-hand corner is Trappers Point. This is built primarily for a pronghorn migration that's been going on for thousands of years. They have to move out of the high country where they spend the summer because of snowpack, and they get down into some lower sagebrush habitat where they spend the winter. You can see the moose crossing that structure in Colorado. I actually went there recently when I attended the International Conference on Ecology and Transportation, ICOET, often referred to as ICOET. And for those of you who are working on this issue, it's every other year they hold this conference. Last year it was in Colorado. Next year it will be in Portland, Oregon. It's a great place to introduce your research, your work, or to network. And I would highly recommend that if you're working on wildlife vehicle collision reduction. This is a structure that's not quite complete yet. It's been in the news a lot. It is approaching nearly $100 million in cost because this structure at Liberty Canyon in California connects one side of the 101 highway to the other, and it's a 10-lane highway that gets over 420,000 vehicles a day. A lot of philanthropic dollars were put into this. The Annenberg Foundation put a lot of money into this. It's going to be called the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing as a result. But one of the reasons why it's being built is because there's an isolated population of mountain lions in the Santa Monica National Recreation Area, which is a unit of the National Park System, and they need to be connected to another population. So again, we don't have these genetic bottlenecks, which is what I was talking about with grizzly bears earlier. Bringing it back to North Carolina, where I live, the first wildlife overpass in the state is currently under construction in Graham County in western North Carolina, over North Carolina 143, at a place called Stokoa Gap. And this is where the Appalachian Trail crosses the highway, just south of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I through hiked the trail in 2000, 2,167 miles at that point in time. It was one of the catalysts for me leaving the corporate world. It was a little 2-lane highway. Well, they're widening it, and that provided the opportunity to build a structure like this, in large part to get hikers safely from one side of the road to the other. It was kind of a blind spot for hikers when you were crossing, but you could hear. So in addition to making a pedestrian bridge, it is also going to serve as a wildlife bridge. I was able to hire Terry McGuire, the wildlife engineer the highway engineer who built those structures in Banff National Park, bring him to North Carolina, meet with the DOT, look at the blueprints, tell them how they could perhaps reduce some of the cost for building this structure. and informed where the fencing went and how actually to separate hikers from wildlife. So that technical assistance is really important in a state like North Carolina, where we've done some things, but overpasses were a whole new critter. Earlier, I showed you 4 wildlife crossings in the West. And one of the reasons why these are coming about is there was a 5-year pilot project to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed during the the Biden administration. It's $350 million over 5 years. The last RFP is about to be released. We don't know when, but it's coming any day now. And that money, once the final RFP goes out, there is no more money in the pipeline. So advocates like myself have been advocating for permanent funding for wildlife crossings, and there actually are bills in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, in the U.S. Congress, to do that. Hopefully, the Congress will see the value and actually provide money, because funding is the biggest obstacle to building underpasses and overpasses and installing fencing. Some people say, well, why would we want to expend limited public resources on this issue at this time? And so there are a lot of reasons. There's public safety issues, there's wildlife conservation issues. But in addition, when you look at our study area and compare it to the West, where you have a vast amount of public lands, and the green in this map are federal public lands, you can see we don't have much here in the East, and most of the population of the country is in the East. So the issues are different in the East than the West. In the West, we often have migratory herds of pronghorn or mule deer or other critters like elk. Here in the East, in the Smokies in particular, they don't need to move seasonally. So it's a low incidence population that's spread out in a large hardwood forest. But in addition, when you look at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Southeast blueprint, where they're actually looking at high biodiversity value, our study area overlaps with a very high conservation value area because of the incredible biodiversity we have here in Western North Carolina and East Tennessee. The 2 projects I'm going to be talking to you about today are the I-40 work and the Pigeon River Gorge, where we conducted 3 years of research in a 28-mile corridor. This is between Maggie Valley, North Carolina, and where the Foothills Parkway ties into I-40 in Tennessee. And then near where I live, I-26 from the Burnsville exit 9 to the state line, and then from there 5 miles to the Flag Pond exit. So 14 miles in that I-26 study area, so half the size basically of our research area for I-40. Our 3-year study on I-40, it commenced in 2019. Our target species or focal species were black bear, elk, and white-tailed deer, in large part because they're large animals. It's easy to find carcasses if they're hit and killed, and they also are the animals that create the most property damage and injury as a result of wildlife vehicle collisions. And this is one of the largest road ecology studies in the eastern U.S. National Parks Conservation Association partnered with Wildlands Network. Dr. Liz Hillard was their primary researcher, and my colleague Steve Goodman represented NPCA. All this work is partnership-based. No one organization can affect change on this scale. It's worth noting that the Appalachian Trail crosses here at the state line. I'm also involved as a partner in the Appalachian Trail Landscape Partnership, which is seeking to improve landscape connectivity from Georgia to Maine, not just for hikers, but for wildlife, because it is a climate corridor. So this is a project of great importance to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. Brings us, it really lifts up our work. So I want to talk about the multifaceted research approach. There's 3 things we did on I-40. The first research objective was assessing wildlife vehicle collisions through data sharing with NCDOT, the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission, and Tennessee DOT, and by conducting weekly mortality driving surveys. So Steve aggregated about 2 decades worth of mortality data that was georeferenced, laid that on a map, and then we did those weekly driving surveys where we found carcasses. We could georeference those. To give you an idea of the scale of the issue on this road, we had 103 dead bears in 3 years in a 28-mile stretch of road. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. You can probably factor that by 2.8, 2.9. That's what road ecology studies have shown, because not everything that gets hit and killed is a carcass that you could find. Or if the carcass gets picked up and removed, either for food by a local or by the DOT agency, we don't know about it. So a lot of property damage, a lot of lost wildlife. This young elk was killed on I-40. It was hit. The driver thankfully wasn't killed. It made its way down to the Pigeon River where it needed to be euthanized, unfortunately. The second research objective was to assess wildlife activity within the highway right-of-way. And so we divided the 28-mile stretch into 116 400-meter segments, and then systematically and randomly selected 34 segments stratified by historic wildlife mortality levels, and we excluded slopes greater than 65%. Where we had these steep slopes with rock cuts, wildlife isn't moving there, so we didn't study there. 2 cameras were deployed along each segment, usually within 40 meters of the highway, facing away from the roadway, so you can see when animals come down and approach the road or encroach upon the roadway itself. Some will try to cross, most will not. We also assess the use of existing structures. This is research objective number 3. So we put our cameras at underpasses, at culverts, things like that. We did lose 20 of our cameras to theft or vandalism, and most of those were at structures where people were driving. The preponderance of photos at the structures were often vehicles, so we used AI to interrogate our data to strip out photos that just showed vehicles and not wildlife, and that was really efficient for us. Some of the other structures where we were monitoring are river bridges, creek culverts. There's also this double tunnel photo in the middle on the bottom. When I-40 was built in 1968 and they tunneled the road in both directions through the mountain, they left a de facto wildlife bridge on top of the roadway, and wildlife would use it. We placed cameras there. Extensive use, not by elk, but by bear, bobcat, a wide variety of species. Unfortunately, when Hurricane Helene hit this area, the area where at the edge of the river collapsed and was eroded to a 90-degree slope. So we're working with the DOT to make that an effective area once again. It was the best place for wildlife to cross in the gorge, and Helene undid that for us. The last objective was to identify and predict where elk road crossings were occurring. Wildlands Networks led this research for us. They, with the help of the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission and the National Park Service, put 13 collars on elk. You saw earlier one of those was killed in Murphy, North Carolina. We had 3 animals that interacted with the highway pretty extensively. One that crossed with her calf a great number of times. She actually cabbed on the opposite side of the highway from the park. And then she would sometimes return under the underpass where the Appalachian Trail crosses under I-40. Here's a research summary. Total cumulatively, we had 70,000 camera trap days with cameras out in the wild, more than 3 million photos, 31,000 wildlife events. As an advocate, because we're using this data to advocate for solutions, the wildlife are often our best advocates. They're our diplomats, and you'll see in a moment how that's really highly effective for us. We talked about our target species, black bear, white-tailed deer, and elk. Look at that bull elk in the bottom right-hand corner, maybe 1,100 pounds. You don't want to have one of those in the road. It's one thing to hit a white-tailed deer. It's next level for elk. We also saw a lot of other mesocarnivores like bobcats. And yes, they're that curious. Red and gray foxes, spotted skunks, and long-tailed weasels. 50 species altogether we found in our research. My colleague Steve at one point shared a photo of a armadillo, which are expanding their range. Also possums carrying carrying leaves in their prehensile tail to their den. I'd not observed that behavior before, nor had Steve. It was pretty neat what you can see on these cameras. When you layer all the data together, the wildlife driving surveys, the camera data where animals are approaching, the carcass data, and the GPS collar data, we can start to assess where the hotspots are. And I would think if you're an AI researcher and you're trying to reduce incidences like this, if you had this georeference data to know, okay, this is a high vehicle collision area, maybe we could give a warning to the driver to watch for wildlife. Often there's not much you can do. One of these animals is in the road because of 18-wheelers bearing down on you, no pun intended. It's a very dangerous highway. What we found that there's low permeability of existing structures. Not surprising because um, they were not there were no wildlife considerations or enhancements when they built this road in 1968. This high bridge was a place where elk would cross from one side of the road to the other beneath. That bridge was recently replaced. One of our recommendations from our research was don't screw this place up, right? Keep a wildlife bench so they can go underneath and incorporate wildlife fencing with the structure. And the DOT has done that. Here's another example. This bridge is in the process of being replaced right now at exit 15 on I-40 in North Carolina. One of our recommendations was to remove that rock outcrop under the north side of the river, and they're doing that. And then to build a bench beside the river on the south side of the river so wildlife could travel under and incorporate wildlife fencing, and they're doing that. We found that some animals wouldn't use culverts and structures like this. This is a structure. You can see the inset photo of what that culvert looks like. The deer came and explored, did not try to use that structure. Ungulates, hooved animals, would have a hard time on that metal culvert. Bears would often use it, but no bears use this particular structure. Similarly, here's a bear investigating a structure. It did not use that structure, and we saw no successful crossings other than raccoons and river otter at that location. But we do have some locations that are actually being utilized by wildlife. This is the Hurricane Creek. There's a triple culvert here, and bears would sometimes use this structure. With the Helene recovery, this is within the impacted area on I-40 near the state line. The DOT has committed to making one of the barrels of this culvert dry in regular flow situations, so that things like bobcat don't like to get their feet wet, unsurprisingly. And under a high flow circumstance, that third culvert would perhaps take some water, so the road didn't get washed out. So there are solutions. They can be challenging. What happens is sometimes bears use the structure here. More often than not, they will divert and try to cross at grade, and you can see the inset photo there, what happens when bears try to cross. Our research, we have a comprehensive report for I-40. It's about 86 pages. One of the uses for it is delivering these to legislators. I spent a lot of time in Raleigh. I just got back from there yesterday, where we're advocating for funding to get a regularized program here in North Carolina. We don't have regular funding for wildlife crossings, and we need to change that. We really want to restore functional connectivity. It's one thing to keep the public safe. That's important. It's another thing to be concerned about individual animals being killed. The other issue is that wildlife is responding to our warming world, climate change, by moving towards the poles. And this highway is an obstacle to movement. So making sure that there's some modifications, that this road is more permeable for wildlife, keeping people safe, is vitally important. Here's a photo of a bear right adjacent this area we call the single tunnel. Is this opportunity where the I-40 eastbound lanes go through the mountain and the I-40 westbound lanes go through a rock cut would be ideal for a wildlife overpass or land bridge. Because in this location, you'd only have to span the two lanes. So from a cost perspective, it would be cheaper. We're trying to get the agency to do a feasibility study here to see if the underlying geology would hold a structure, and if they could actually build something there. But the outside experts we brought in have said that's an ideal location, and our data has borne that out as well. There's another animal photograph taken within about 40 meters of the road right there. One of the things that people ask a lot is, well, do they use these things? And the answer is yes. Here's a bobcat with a kitten on November 17, 2019. She jumps up into the culvert and hopes her kitten is going to follow her. The kitten can't figure it out. It's not a successful crossing for the two of them. 4 days later, same pair. Watch this. So once an adult teaches the young about using these structures, it just becomes another passage in their habitat. This structure is passing water, which is not a best practice for wildlife movement. So having dry passage for things like bobcat is super important. They feel compelled to move and are willing to get their feet wet, but you can see the kitten is not jumping in the flow, and the mother tries to avoid it as well. This is a Hurricane Creek in one side, out the other. It shows some successful use. This is the area where they often divert and cross at grade and get killed. River otter, same structure, in one side, out the other. I said bobcats don't like to get their feet wet. They really don't. As an owner of 2 house cats, I understand. This is an animal marking its territory adjacent to the single tunnel. Pretty cool behavior that we could capture on our cameras. Here's some photos. As I said earlier, these animals become ambassadors for us. This animated GIF with a bobcat, with a collared black bear. There was another research project that the Smokies was performing. When they moved problem bears, they would move them on the north side of I-40, and they put GPS collars on all the problem bears that they moved. And by problem bears, these are animals that became food conditioned and were eating trash. 3 of those bears got hit on I-40 trying to cross and return to the park. Bears are highly intelligent, and they wanted to get back to the park, and unfortunately 3 of them in that study did not make it. Female with cub. This is a species of special concern in North Carolina. It's a spotted skunk. It's about the size of a gray squirrel. It is arboreal like squirrels. And we provided a lot of data to the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission on spotted skunks and long-tailed weasels and other species of special concern that the agency didn't know much about. From an advocacy perspective, this is Governor Roy Cooper, former Governor Roy Cooper, and myself and partners and students met with him a couple years back. The students had read a book by my friend and colleague Francis Feigert called A Search for Safe Passage, which is a children's book based on our research on I-40. These kids wrote letters to the governor and presented them to the governor. His heart kind of melted there. That's me on the left. Next to me on the right is Stephen Doby. The 2 women on the far right are Dr. Liz Hillard on the right, Nikki Robinson on the left. Manly Fuller is obscured by Stephen Doby. He's a lobbyist with North Carolina Wildlife Federation. And the fellow behind me is Bill Holman, retired with the Conservation Fund. From an outreach perspective, we brought our findings to the North Carolina DOT board, presented to them, and we built supporters there. It's vitally important if you want to make change from an infrastructure perspective to do this sort of outreach. And here's myself with Roy Cooper once again. Yesterday, I was in Raleigh. The 2 legislators photoed here are Representative Phil Shepard and Frank Eiler. Eiler is 3rd from the right, and Shepard is 3rd from the left. I'm behind Shepard there. They're the co-chairs of the House Transportation Committee in the North Carolina General Assembly. So we spend a lot of time there. We have a lobbyist firm that helps us get these meetings. Let's talk about some other recommendations from our work. At Cold Spring Creek, this is an important area. They replaced the bridge. We asked them to put in some wildlife benches, so they built a bench like this on both sides of this road. It's not complete. but recently the DOT committed to doing something pretty cool. You notice there's a double concrete box culvert in the stream, sort of in the middle of the photo there. What they're going to do is they're going to build up the level in one of those so under normal flow conditions, it remains dry, that wildlife can cross beneath the I-40 westbound on-ramp and the I-40 eastbound off-ramp. So they're going to do this in both locations, and that should improve passage. They also put in these cattle guards so that elk would not walk up the ramps and get into the area, and they put jump out structures in case animals got beyond the wildlife fencing, which is installed here. They need to have a way to get out, and those jump outs are that solution. There's the bench on the other side of the road. Didn't take long for wildlife to start using these, but the area needs to revegetate. Things like bobcats, they're stealthy. The vegetation is growing up. When it's growing up more, it'll be more effective. This is me with a consortium of students from 6 different universities, including the University of Missouri, giving them a tour. They're aspiring wildlife biologists talking about our research, and it's a big part of my work. I'll give you the backstory on this. My friend Frances, when I first met her, she worked for Smoky's Life, which is a friends group for the park. She was talking to the wildlife biologist at the park at the time and said, on I-26, we've got problems with bears getting hit all the time. There's a Jersey barrier, a concrete barrier between the lanes. Adult bears can climb over, cubs can't. And just the other day, I drove this road. I saw a dead cub right next to the barrier. They simply couldn't get over it. So I said, Frances, this is 2018. If we really need to focus on I-40 right now, but if we're successful, maybe we can turn our attention to I-26. And that day has come and gone, and we have conducted research on I-26. So I'm going to turn my attention there. The nexus of interest for my organization is the Appalachian National Scenic Trail, which is a unit of the national park system. It passes at the state line. So this is a 14-mile research area. Some photos. This would be hard to see. These photos have to be manually looked at by a biologist. And that's a long-tailed weasel on the lower right corner. You can see the eye shine with a large rat in its mouth. They're major predators. In this case, unlike I-40, we use citizen scientists, local volunteers to provide observations for us, in part because I-26 has about 9,000 vehicles a day, as opposed to 29,000 on I-40. So it's a safer highway to actually record and georeference mortality. And here's some of the many observations that we had. I won't linger too long. This is disturbing. A lot of barred owls got hit, by the way. I don't know how we're going to fix that problem or if it is fixable, but that's something we saw quite a bit of. We have focal species, but we're taking an all taxa approach. This is a photo of a dead box turtle, and it portrays the obscene challenges that wildlife encounter when trying to cross this 6-lane highway. A hotspot analysis for I-26. Here we go. We were able to look at both where animals are approaching and the mortality data and actually identify where the problem areas are. We did not GPS collar elk here, so we didn't have that data point, but elk are not in this area all that often. We did have one hit in 2018 on the road, but it was a young traveler. Here's a summary from that research: 48 cameras, 16 at structures, 32 in the forested right-of-way, 21,500 wildlife events. And here's a photo right near the wolf laurel exit. The right-of-way has these grassy areas. That's a black bear that's circled. You can often see them in the daytime actually foraging on this hillside next to I-26. Sometimes you'll see one day, and the next day you'll see one dead on the side of the road. And this is what that bear looked like on one of our cameras, because that bear was right next to our camera. Here's another animal we captured on a snowy day in the right-of-way, a red fox, beautiful. Coyote. Notice it's looking right at the camera, right? These animals are highly intelligent. I don't know if it probably makes a noise that I can't hear, but I'm half deaf anyway from too much loud music. Just some more right-of-way activity. Right there, we have a camera. Look at that buck right there, right next to the roadway. bobcat, long-tailed weasels, wild turkeys. I've been seeing more wild turkeys killed on the side of the road than I have. I don't know if it's due to population growth or to the bird flu, but for whatever, anecdotally, I'm seeing a lot more roadkill wildlife, wild turkeys. Here's an area where we had a camera up on that ridge. There's a large black bear that you definitely would not like in the road. There's a couple of deer, a young male, bobcat. Sometimes we see some things we didn't expect to see, things that go bump in the night, right? This mating pair of black bear on our cameras. Unbelievable. In terms of assessing the use of existing structures, we have 4 box culverts, 2 in North Carolina and 2 in Tennessee in our study area, and this large span bridge also in North Carolina. We have span bridges in Tennessee. Span bridges are great because it elevates the roadway and wildlife can cross beneath it. But there is currently no wildlife fencing associated with that structure. They often do divert, try to cross at grade. So on both sides of that bridge, it's a mortality hotspot. We try to partner with academia when we can. Dave Chakowski at Clemson, he has a lab there, and one of his students, Chloe Horton, analyzed some of our data and tried to analyze factors influencing wildlife visitation and crossing success at structures both on I-26 and I-40. The I-40 data was from our collaborative research with Dr. Hillard. Factors correlated with visitation were species-specific: black bears selected for forest cover, bobcats for prey activity, and red foxes for areas farther from water. Successful crossings were less likely at drainage pipes, in inundated structures, and when there was higher human activity. Chloe's findings highlight the importance of species-specific structure design. Her manuscript, entitled Carnivore Community Responses to Road Crossing Structures in the Southern Blue Ridge Mountains, was recently submitted to the Journal of Biological Conservation. This is the South culvert, looking at some statistics. During our research period, we had 3 bears actually cross successfully, 12 approaches. So you can see, 4 times more approaches and not crossing than successful crossings. Similar with bobcat, coyote, white-tailed deer, 37 successful crossings, but 448 approached it. So in analyzing this, we realized that deflection fencing, see, first of all, that's right-of-way fencing associated with a wildlife underpass. It should be taller fencing, and it should be fanned out to run parallel to the roadway. This fencing actually acts more like an exclosure than deflection fencing that would help critters find this crossing. So that's one of our recommendations that will be coming out in our report. This is what the road looks like above that culvert, by the way. Some of our culverts are too wet. I don't know how we're going to dry them out, but that could help with some passage. Here's a bear successfully going in and out. This white-tailed deer did also. You see the hesitancy. They're concerned about predators. In yellow are the cameras deployed at the structure, shown in green, and further into the forest. For black bears, we found detection rates 3 to 10 times higher along the nearest ridge lines compared to those at the structures. This, along with the observed number of approaches, seems to indicate that the structure is in a good area, but potentially underutilized or avoided. Highlighted in blue are land conservation opportunities that are needed to protect this existing wildlife corridor long term. There have been a number of land acquisitions, almost 750 acres, as part of this project, thanks to our partners at the Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy. We need to do more of that work. Here's another structure. You can see our recommendations right there: properly align the fencing, as I said, have that vegetation there, noise abatement if possible, and land conservation. I want to give a shout out to my partners. There are 7 organizations that came together to form the Safe Passage Coalition. And the catalyst for that was creating a fund, a private fund where people could donate to this project. And you can go to Smoky's safepassage.org, check out the work of these folks, make a donation if you want to, totally voluntary. But again, these are organizations coming together. You have different priorities, different decision-making processes. but we're coming together in common cause on this issue. And here are a number of other partners that are integral to I-26 South Wings. It got us up over the highway in a light plane. Their mission is conservation through aviation. We also had troopers that were texting my colleague Steve with wildlife mortality sightings, geo-referencing that. Mars Hill University is one of our partners. Ironically, I was in a senator's office yesterday, and the president of the university was there on a lobby trip, and he invited us to do some events there. So when we roll out our I-26 research findings in a couple of months, we're going to do that at Mars Hill University. One of the really cool things is that the North Carolina Commerce Department has allowed us to put exhibits in the North Carolina Welcome Centers on I-40 and I-26. On the left, you see a number of partners. We went out and we did a field trip. Those that were in the field were wearing those safety vests. The fellow on the far left is Terry McGuire from Banff National Park, again, adding value for us. That's the end of my presentation. I'm really grateful that you could join today. This is one of the coolest projects I've ever had the privilege of working on in all my years, and in part because there's broad public support. Nobody wants to see a dead animal. No one wants to hit an animal. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. It's a problem we all face, and we need to come together if we're going to affect change. So I'm going to stop sharing, and if we have time for questions, let's do it.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. Very exciting presentation. I'm sure that there will be so many questions, but let me, before turning to the question, Jeff, I would like to again, as Steven was asking, because that's kind of critical for the sake of the research activities and the communication that we are making. I would like to you to also comment on how this how did we get to know each other, and how we are here. I want to know the team, the value of communicating the research. If you can comment on that would be helpful.
Sure. It was serendipitous. I was at Wicked Weeds Funkatorium, a brewery in Asheville, for a Chamber of Commerce meeting. It was a public meeting about responding to Hurricane Helene. I was interested in the content, and I got there early, and they had a TV on, and Spectrum News was on with the sound off. And I looked up, and there's Ali on the screen, and the caption said something about, AI solutions for wildlife vehicle collisions. And I was like, oh, I've got to talk to this gentleman. A student was also shown in that in a simulator. So I got real excited. And again, what I'm often doing is preaching the gospel of wildlife crossings, and anyone we can work with and align with, that's how we're going to be successful, is working together.
Great, thank you. And yeah, so this is the way that the communication started. So we reach out, and then Jeff reach out, and then we continued the conversation. And we had a couple of other meetings with Wayne, Ronnie, and Jidong, and others. And we hope that we can see how we can. There are, as everybody saw in Jeff's today's presentation, there are a lot of problems there, and there are opportunities that we can help. And one of the opportunities, by the way, is a field trip to come there. So at some point, hopefully, we can make a field trip, and a couple of our students or other universities. There are other universities within the CR2C2. There are 7 universities. So potentially, we can reach out and come for these field trips and see the problems in real world rather than necessarily in the labs. So that's really appreciated. Go ahead. You want to make a point?
Just real quick, from an advocacy perspective, if anyone is animated by this work, one of the things I would recommend you do is to call your 2 U.S. senators and your House representative and tell them to do something in the transportation bill about wildlife crossings. Vitally important. If you live in North Carolina, reach out to your state senator and your House member and let them know you support funding for wildlife crossings. My ask yesterday was for $10.2 million, 5.1 in each of the next 2 budget cycles. It's in the Senate bill. We're trying to build champions on the House side. This is how it's going to get done. So thank you for allowing me to mention that.
Thank you. And then the other thing, Jeff, that I do have a question, and then I will open it up for questions. Can you comment a lot of things, passage and whatever, so they are primarily on the construction side, and there might be some opportunities for technology. What and you are already using some devices for example, capturing the Animal Crossing and so on. That's one aspect that, and then after that, you have been using some AI models to detect different species and then those sort of things. But if you can a little bit more comment on from the technology lens, what do you think can be done to improve and partially address this problem?
Sure. There are solutions where you can put up equipment that detect wildlife crossing the road, and then that would trigger some lights that would alert drivers. One problem with that technology is it needs to be regularly maintained, because when it malfunctions and flashes all the time when there's not an animal there, what do people do? They ignore it. Oh, that sign's always flashing. And so the alert is ineffective and people end up hitting animals. By the way, signage is the least effective way to influence changes in driver behavior. It doesn't work. There is signage warning people of bears on the road. The image in North Carolina on that sign is the outline of a grizzly bear, by the way, not a black bear. We have no grizzlies here in North Carolina. And then on Tennessee, they actually put up a sign because there are feral goats that are living next to the roadway. Wayne, if you've ever driven to Johnson City, I'm sure you've seen these goats. It's about 5 miles from your place there in North Carolina. Yeah, that's about the most I can say, Ali, about it. Again, my focus is on infrastructure solutions. So both of those things need to be worked on.
Great. Yeah, and both approaches, by the way, are necessary. So that doesn't mean that the other. So yep, opening up for questions. If there's any question, feel free to step in and either put it in chat box or directly to unmute yourself and ask a question. And then after that, please mute yourself back. Any question?
Don't be shy. There's no such thing as a stupid question.
Okay, Jeff. Very inspirational talk. I joined in the middle, but I really like the talk. But my question is twofold. One, we are all living in southern state, very conservative, and I'm not sure whether they care much about wildlife or not. That's why everything that you do is going to take a champion. Both in the doesn't matter whether, of course, North Carolina is better than Tennessee, I think, but whatever it is, we are now in an ecosystem that we are trying to basically empower our policymaker to set aside funding. That's for a very good cause. A few questions that I have is this: you mentioned about you lay out a number of camera to basically track the traffic of these animals and their crossing. We know animals, they don't stay in one particular area, and depending on the season, on the year itself, so there is going to be a movement. So do you have any historical information to say that, okay, I need to basically make sure that I have enough cameras that installed at particular areas that can trace the movement of a camera? And do you have those kind of data available, historical data that available, people can use it?
Thank you for the question. So our camera data has not been made publicly available. We use some of those images for our outreach. In terms of technology, Ali, you asked that question, and I did not say that the cameras we used were Reconyx cameras, which are, pretty fancy. They're about $600 a piece. Grateful for partners at Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation for providing money to purchase those, and the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission for loaning us a bunch of cameras. We couldn't have done this work without them. And other donors also helped us purchase cameras. By us, I mean NPCA. The one thing seasonally, one thing we see is there's a spike in bear and deer mortality in the fall. Bear undergo something called hyperphagia in the fall. They need to ingest a lot of calories, primarily acorns, when they're not accessing human food. Acorn crops, mass failures occur periodically. For whatever reason, some years, no acorns, right? When that happens, lots more bears in the road, lots more mortality. That's one of the things that anecdotally we knew, and in our data we saw that. Same with white-tailed deer when they go in the rut, when they're mating in the fall. Really need to watch out dawn and dusk in particular. But any time of day, these animals can be in the middle of the road. Back to your point about conservative states and building champions. In the Senate, Senator Bill Rabin is our champion. He's a retired veterinarian. He's a very influential member of the Senate and the North Carolina General Assembly. We have Senator Mike Lazzara. He's on the Transportation Committee, another champion. We're continuing to build champions there. On the House side, often I'm joined, so I work for a national green group, right? And the reception that I might get with some legislators is not as good as the reception when I'm sitting next to someone from the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, a more conservative leaning group, or the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. And I saw that in these meetings. I mentioned Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation to one very important conservative legislator in the House, and he lit up. And my colleague in Kentucky, who works for the Elk Foundation, is going to come east and take that legislator and his son on a tour to see elk. So this is how we change hearts and minds. This is how we ultimately get the appropriations that are needed to make the changes on the ground.
Thank you.
There is a question in chat box and saying that looks like that the focus has been primarily on larger wildlife. How about the smaller or medium size? Because still from the driver perspective, they might, even the smaller size might also kind of create some risk to the drivers and kind of oversee or what some challenges with driving. Do you have any comment on that one?
Sure. Well, let's leave I-40 and I-26 for a moment and go out to eastern North Carolina to the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, where US 64 passes through there. They were recently awarded a $25 million federal grant to elevate the roadway and put crossing structures beneath the road. Why beneath? It's about 6 foot above sea level in that area. You can't really go above. And plus the habitat is not ideal. Wildlands Network and Defenders of Wildlife hired some people to walk the road. They saw 19 species of dead snakes, lots of different species of salamanders, of frogs, just the stuff that you really can't see for the most part. I mean, I pay attention to it because I've done a lot of driving surveys and I can see a salamander. I'm driving slow enough, right? So these structures could, if they're put in the right place, potentially benefit some of this, the smaller fauna. We mentioned box turtles because, they're disappearing. People collect them, but they're poached. They're also hit quite a bit. If you ever see a turtle that's crossing the road, by the way, if you can safely move it, you want to move it in the direction that it's traveling. An animal knows where it's going. If you put it back on the other side of the road, it's going to cross again. So,
okay, great. So any other question? We have 3 more minutes if there is any other question. If not, Jeff, thanks again. We look forward to continued collaboration. Jidang also was here. He was supposed to leave the call, but I'm sure that there will be follow-up questions and conversations, potential field trips, joint projects, and there are things. By the way, before also we leave, is there a way that we can have access to the data that you might be having, or anything that we can help with data, classifying data, doing those sort of things? Is there any way that we have access to that data before?
Did I give you access to the report from I-40?
You did. The report, we had it, but the image, the raw data for images, no. But feel free to put it in chat box for the report for the I-40.
Let's, I don't have the link here. If perhaps you can have a follow-up email to the participants and share that. As we right now, the I-26 data and the report has been written, and we're looking for. I think we've located someone who can lay that out for us, the designer. Hopefully, we'll have that data, that report that we can release in September, and be happy to explore ways to work together to interrogate our data to help improve your research and your work as well.
Great, great. Thank you again. It was very insightful talk, and we enjoyed it, and learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.